Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cloaked Live. I'm Veronica Sarin. I'm the head of marketing here at Cloaked, and we're here today to dive into the discussion and a conversation with some of our favorite security experts. Not that I'm biased or anything. We're going to be discussing some news of the day, some trends, and some unbelievable firsthand experiences that you've never heard before. And these experiences impact our security and privacy. So we have with us our Cloaked CEO, Arjun Bhatnagar, as well as industry veteran and our CISO, Scott Foote. Thank you both for joining the conversation.
Of course. Excited
Thanks
to
for having
have
us,
these
Veronica.
recurring. I'm glad Scott and I can get a chance to chat.
Yes, it's going to be great. So let's get started by just letting our viewers know a little bit more about each of you and the folks here on stage who are in the hot seat. So Scott, let's start with you, since you are not as well known to our Cloaked audience, and yet you play such a pivotal role at Cloaked as well as in the broader security and privacy space.
That's kind of the bane of the CISO job, right, Veronica? We're
Yes.
invisible unless something happens, until there's a breach, and then all of a sudden, our name's everywhere. Yeah, so my background started off in security anyway. It started off in the late 80s, and it was incidental to work I was doing then as a developer. And that escalated, and eventually I became a product leader, a product executive for security companies. But in the 90s, the threat wasn't high enough, and it was a very difficult market. To convince someone they had the vulnerability or that the exploitation would be serious, that was a hard sell. Eventually, I wound up switching places, and instead of being the vendor, I wound up being the consumer. On the other side of things, I spent a little bit of time privately before meeting the government, wound up going to work with the government on defensive types of things, some of which you know today as Cyber Command. It's evolved into Cyber Command. But I spent the better part of 10 years doing that, consulted for a few years afterwards. But as I came out, I was advising CIOs and CISOs about their programs from a strategy all the way through to task point of view. And I finally wound up just standing up a consultancy to do that. And it was through that consultancy that I met Arjun, when we started to talk about the security implications that create privacy breaches. And here we are today.
Oh, yeah. It's been definitely a few interesting years.
Arjun, most folks know you, but for those of us who are new, let us know who you are.
So I think most people know me, but it's funny. So Scott says, until it's a problem, people don't know him. The opposite problem, the CEO, is that any situation, anytime, it's my fault. So it's something you have to wear as a badge and create thick skin. A little bit about me for folks who are listening or hearing from me for the first time. I'm Arjun, our CEO, been in tech for a while. The joke I always say is that I've been an industry veteran, not as much as Scott, but I've been in industry for 17 years. But the sad thing is that I'm 27. So I got my first job when I was 10, was a team lead by 11, was kind of leading more than 20 plus engineers by 14, then kept growing from there. And so it's built thick skin across a lot of experiences, with the added challenge of people saying, wait, you're 16. I don't know why you're telling me what to do, which has always been an interesting challenge for me. But through experience and learning about technology and having kind of the depth allowed me to command respect and grow across the field, from engineer all the way to CTO at big companies, then wearing operational product hats across the board, and then Cloaked being my third company. My whole goal is that this is it. This is the big one. I don't want to go make my fourth or fifth. But yeah, it's been a very fun journey overall.
Amazing. And what I've always liked is that you've always declared, Cloaked is it. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. It's a very conviction. We love that.
It's I knew that before I jumped to my next thing, I was like, well, I want to find the thing I want to sink my teeth in for the rest of my life. Otherwise, it's not fun. I couldn't make a quick buck doing anything else. I'd rather take on a hard problem that no one knows how to properly crack.
Absolutely. And speaking about a hard problem that no one knows how to properly crack, what we're going to do is touch briefly on a breach that happened this week. We're going to discuss that. After that, we'll talk a little bit about some stories that y'all have from the industry, especially you, Scott. And then we'll wrap up. And if there's any questions in the comments, we can address those as well. So first off, let's briefly touch on the breach news of the week. And I'm going to read out what we sent in our newsletter this week. If you haven't signed up for the Cloaked newsletter, all you have to do is sign up for Cloaked and you will be given the option to join our newsletter. All right. So Roku disclosed a breach that allowed hackers to gain access to over 15,000 accounts and stored credit card information. In a notice sent to customers, Roku says that hackers obtained login information and tried to purchase streaming subscriptions in a limited number of instances, but they did that nevertheless. So we'll start with you, Scott. What is your take on this, and does this remind you of anything?
Oh, yeah, it reminds me of a lot of different circumstances, but to level set what happened. So from a Roku perspective, it wasn't vulnerabilities in the Roku platform. Not to say they don't have them, but in this particular circumstance, what happened was credentials were stolen from somewhere else, right? Think about the keys to your house. Someone took copies to the keys to your house because you were on some other platform. Could have been a data broker, could have been, in this case, it was actually stolen and offered up on the dark web. Those credentials were used, and it's called credential stuffing. They were used to open up end users' accounts on the Roku platform and take them over. You get into it, you change the password so the actual user, Veronica, can no longer get in. And the threat actor, Scott, is now in that account and using things like your credit card to buy things, buy streaming services, buy physical things, changing the location of where things are being shipped to. So that's really more of an exploitation. It wasn't that Roku dumped the data in a breach. It was that they were exploited and they had to notify customers when, of course, customers couldn't get into their environments. So, but absolutely, it's reminiscent of dozens of account takeover types of circumstances. I deal a lot with commercial industry today where we see business email compromise. That's when a business is attacked and the individual accounts, sometimes they're shut out. So think of that as a kind of a ransomware event, right? Just to lock somebody out of their business account. And sometimes they don't shut them out. They just sit in the background to continue to siphon data off from that business user. But on the commercial side, we see it all over the place. Everything from Target back over a decade ago, Yahoo, Home Depot, you name it. A lot of retailers have the same problem, where the data gets dumped out to some type of a dark web marketplace. This is called an access, right? What you look on the dark web for is validated access. Oh, look at that, Veronica's account. Let me go check to see if the password works. I buy that, and now I'm into that account. This happens almost daily.
Scott, I'm curious around, as someone who's also in the space where we're trying to take this as a company, credential stuffing is probably one of the most easiest attacks people can commit, but has one of the biggest impacts for brands. We all know what's happened with 23andMe, and that's kind of spiral of control. I remember reading about the Roku stuff, and I was thinking about people actually tried making purchases, and because Roku is also a marketplace, you can start, it's not just buying subscriptions, you can buy products, buy different things, and we saw those attempts. I think, I don't want to think about using just us as a company, but before even Cloaked, I wonder what would be the best offer that you could tell someone you should be doing X to prevent self-credential stuffing. I know we say unique passwords, but I think there's obviously more to that. If every company's getting breached, what more can someone do?
Well, from the unique password has always been a good thing, but most people skip over the first part, though. How about unique usernames?
Yeah.
We take for granted, oh, my username's now going to be my email. It's easy to remember, right? And we think that it is unique within the platforms. But that's the first thing that an adversary needs. Even before they have your password credential, they need to know your username. Those two things we have just not treated with enough respect. The username, then the password, we use them all over the place. That we're finally defeating that, but it's taken quite a bit of bad press to show just how serious this is. And to Arjun, your point, This is a ridiculously easy thing for an adversary to exploit.
Scott, a little bird told me that you use something called CATE, C-A-T-E, to talk about data breaches. Can you share about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I talk to a lot of technical audiences, but for the non-technical audiences, consumers, really, I use it as an acronym to explain the 4 stages of what's happening with their data. The first piece, they're completely unaware of, right? Data collection. That's the C in CATE, the data collection. We're collecting data. We, as providers on the internet, people collect data with everything you do. Every browser touch, even your cursor movement in some platforms is collected. The second piece is the aggregation. All that data from like the Facebooks of the world is going off to the data brokers. And of course, they're building this for demographic purposes, right? It's not deliberately malicious, but it is ridiculously invasive. And again, most consumers have no idea these data aggregators even exist. They've heard some of the names like, the credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, things like that. But then you talk to them about the theft. To that breach point you made, Veronica, where do you think the adversaries, the threat actors, are going to get all this rich data? They're going to the data aggregators. These are, I use the word kind of colloquial, especially with a non-technical audience, but think of them as a privacy piñata. If I'm a threat actor and I want to get access to that information, I'm going to go there. And the last piece is the exploitation. Credential stuffing is just one way that the threat actors exploit that data. And again, as Arjun stated, this is ridiculously simple. A middle school kid can buy credentials today and do credential stuffing in just minutes.
It's funny that you say that talking about middle schoolers. There's the whole incident about that 17-year-old who hacked Rockstar, Uber. But we could talk about that later. There's so many stories where if you're motivated enough, a lot of people could do a lot of harm.
Absolutely. And I think we got through, so C is credentials, A is aggregator, T is
threat. I'm sorry, theft.
And then
theft E is the exploitation.
Exploitation. Excellent.
Which is what happened to Roku. Roku is in the exploitation phase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. That is a good acronym for us to revisit, especially in future episodes of this series, and then we'll be able to talk about them in a very consistent manner. I'm going to shift a little bit to some other stories that we have, and obviously, Scott, you have tons of these from the past, but I'd like to bring it a little broad in terms of what you've experienced. And can you reflect on some of the largest data breaches over the past 10 years and maybe some stories that you have from that are not under NDA?
Sure. So the shorter story would be, what haven't I experienced? It's everything from threat, denial, degradation, destruction of computer systems. I mean, critical infrastructure issues, you name it. The bottom line is we have dependency on computing infrastructure and information, not just consumers, but industry as well. And many of those dependencies are hidden. So it's difficult to defend what you don't see, what you can't see. And today's world is so much more complex than when I started back in the 80s. So kinds of things that I've seen. Well, I've seen large scale data theft and exploitation for massive amounts of money that initially weren't even being exposed. When I first started to get into this, I was working on one, this is going back almost 30 years, but it was a medical case where a huge medical provider had a problem. They didn't know that they had kind of the one of the world's first examples of ransomware. And I got involved to do incident response because they thought the destruction of the data had been accidental. After about 3 weeks of examining the environment, we realized this was an accidental destruction. And it got worse when we found, in that case, it was bulletin boards, but we found the data was being sold.
Yeah.
And this was 30 years ago. So that was the beginning, but there are so many other stories about how data has been used subtly, much more subtly than in ransomware, but to manipulate people all the way through to change perceptions.
Scott, when you think about that, just the idea of ransomware, it's always a big topic, and it's become. We just had recently, I think, with the healthcare breach that just happened in the last couple of weeks.
Change
What?
healthcare.
Yeah, right. I think about, well, people say, should you pay the ransomware? Should you not? And we have instances of both. That's always the tough question I want to say is like, what should one do? I know it's not legal advice, but I'm curious around how should people approach the problem when they take on whether they should make the decision to pay or not pay.
Well, as you can imagine, I've been in that conversation more times than I can remember.
Oh yeah,
And
I'm sure.
it's never calm, cool, rational, right? There's always there's the oh crap moment when the executive team finds out that they've been ransomed. And then there's the discussion of the five whats, like what happened, so what, right? Did they actually get that data? How much did they get? Whose data? Then what else is going on beyond just the ransomware event, beyond the extortion? And then what now? What can we do about it? That's where the question comes up. Should we pay the ransom? And that's a really difficult decision for most organizations. When we run them through exercises, I do this all the time. Every quarter, I'm doing at least one. And one of the first things we say is, well, can you even pay the ransom? Meaning, is this a sanctioned entity in your sovereign country? Are you prevented by your government from paying that ransom? That's happening actually far more often now than it was in the past. Then how would you even pay the ransom? Do you know how to get Bitcoin or Ethereum, right?
Yeah.
These people don't have, they don't have crypto wallets.
No.
They have no idea how to do it. So you go through that process, and then there's the process of, okay, what have they asked for? 10 million, whatever, in Bitcoin. Okay, are they willing to take less? Will they negotiate? Because these are, at the end of the day, although they're malicious, they're business people that
They're
are
businesses.
trying to,
It's so
they're trying to
funny.
make money. They're
Yeah.
trying to maximize their return. So you go through that process with these leadership teams. The whole time, the IT team is trying to do the restoration. Can they restore? Can they
Yeah.
decrypt? Right? And the legal team is saying, what's the liability to us in terms of the data that was spilled? Do we even know what data was taken? And in most cases, you don't. Right? It's very hard to determine exactly what the threat actor took. So the bottom line is, when it comes down, I'm usually, as the CISO, I'm saying, no, I recommend we don't pay the ransom.
Okay.
But it's a business decision because of the reputational damage, right? The notification obligations that come along depending upon the data. It's a very hard topic, conversation to have. And I really prefer that our clients practice that conversation, that they actually dry run it before it hits them for real.
You mentioned around the idea that the notification and these things happen. I want to talk about a couple of things. One, just always interested to follow this thread because I think about this a lot. First, about the notification to consumer. People are inundated as a new breach every single day, and the thing is that we feel it, we see it, and we're like, "Oh, it's great." What do I do now? I remember for myself back in 2021, Park Mobile had a breach. And I think I printed out the email and I circled it, and I thought it was hilarious because it said we had a breach. It impacted all users, which are millions of people. And it said, don't worry, your password and your credit card are safe. Only your name, date of birth, address, your car type, car color, your favorite,
all the
everything
things.
else. But only, don't worry, your password is safe. And I was like, I remember seeing that's and
people can take out a loan in your name, but don't worry, your password hasn't been lost.
Credit card information completely safe. It's fine.
Yeah,
you're making model of car for your credit report.
And it's weird. Exactly, it's funny. Actually, and think about this. Your security questions are often, what is the make and model of your car?
Yeah.
I wonder. I'm sure there were breaches that happened because of that breach due to that effort. But how do we think about it? How should we approach it? I remember seeing a funny scene in a TV show I watched at Apple TV that it's called Mythic Quest. And they had a breach. It's a video game, and the guy said, "There's a breach every day. Who cares?" And I always think about, why should we care about breaches, our information being out there? Why is that so important?
Well, you're exactly right. We went from no visibility over the last 2 decades to every day, literally every day. We're hearing about it in the press, and we're receiving email to our personal account saying, "Oh yeah, so and so has probably spilled your email," right? So
Yeah.
it does desensitize us to it. It does get us to the point where we give up. And there's two questions. The first is that "so what" question. And that's what a lot of consumers say is, "So what? I'm exposed everywhere. The whole world knows everything about me. So what?" Well, the "so what" eventually comes home when you find out that, like during the pandemic, somebody has filed for unemployment in your name,
Yeah.
right? Or your credit report. Most people don't pull their credit report. I recommend people do it 4 times a year, even if it costs them money, because they can see where others are trying to open up new loans, for example. Another place that's really unusual is where our identities get used to apply for jobs. Believe it
Yeah.
or not, that's a huge
Yeah.
problem, right? On the job boards where people are fraudulently applying, whether they're trying to use your history, your credentials, or they're just trying to use you so that their background check comes through clean, right? But people masquerade all the time. It comes down to that "so what" question. And unfortunately, for most consumers, until they get hit with it, it's just theoretical. They don't feel the pain. But the other
Yeah.
question you asked is, what
Yeah.
can we
Good.
do
Good.
about it? The reason for the CATE acronym is because the non-technical consumers ask me all the time, what can I do? So, okay, I'm convinced it's bad. What can I do? I say, move all the way back to the C. First, acknowledge that people are doing collection on you. Don't give them real information.
Yeah.
Deceive them. Don't use your username for, email for your username. That most people don't even think about it, but start there and don't reuse it. For the security questions, Arjun, don't answer them honestly. Don't use the name of a town for where
Yeah.
you grew up. Use a color, right? Use a
Yeah.
verb, but mix it up so that the data, only you know the relevance of the data. And it's not that easy to exploit when it is stolen, because it will be. If it hasn't already, it will be stolen. So I use that CATE acronym to say, you as a consumer, back all the way up and snip it right at the very beginning. Mess with the collection so that when it is collected and aggregated and stolen, it's going to be useless.
What are your thoughts for passwords when people say like having unique passwords? How should we think about it? There's a great comic that I used to read around it's better to compute. We've designed passwords so poorly that they're difficult to remember but easy for computers to crack. And with
Right.
the 8 to 12 characters in length, one letter, one capital, one number, one symbol, but the complexity is not on length. I know on the type of characters, complexity actually comes on length. What would you kind of think about how people should be approaching just even their own passwords?
First, the idea that a password, just a single, like a key like that, is what you use to get into a high value account. That was old 4 decades ago, to be totally honest. I don't mean to just be dismissive about it, but to your point, it's easy to crack from a computer standpoint, even up to 12 characters, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about, crypto, quantum environments that are going to be able to break crypto that we have today within a matter of quarters to years. So first and foremost, don't rely just on the password. It's going to be great when we can move consumers to a passwordless environment like we're trying to do today in industry. Let's just put that aside because that's a future. What we can do today is, make the passwords more complex. But
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be just one of these, auto-generated passwords. I like to use minimum 16 characters, but that's because this is what I do, right? And I will auto-generate them. I use password managers, for example. But for really key accounts, what I use is a much longer string.
Yeah.
But it's a phrase.
It's a
It's a
phrase, right?
passphrase. Those are much easier for consumers to remember. The passphrase. The next thing is, we as providers of systems should not rely on just passwords. There should never be a system, provided to a consumer anywhere that only relies on a password. Give me some more factors. Even if it's additional knowledge factors, give me more factors. I like to also do things though, like say, I want to, you see this all the time with banks, for example, they will actually fingerprint your device and say,
Yeah.
we've never seen you log in from this device or phone or whatever before. Hang on, we want to go authenticate you through the previous channel. So authentication needs to grow up way beyond the simple password. And short passwords, that to me, it's negligence. even where we are today with consumers, I would say the consumer is negligent if they're stuffing in password 123, or if the password's not longer than 8 characters. But that requires a little bit of training. It requires coaching, and it's got to be simple, or consumers won't adopt it.
It's true.
Oh, I fully agree.
Actually, on that note, I'm gonna very quickly pose our last question for this fireside chat, and then we have at least one question here in the comments that I want to make sure we also get to. So let's start with this. One thing that we must do and change. So we talked about credential stuffing, the stress of breaches. What's the number one issue that you would hope to be focused on, or think that we need to focus on as an industry in order to prevent a lot of these issues from occurring? And we'll start with you, Arjun, because you've been asking a lot of the good follow-ups.
Yeah, sure. I think I have a simple premise, which Scott could probably agree and probably had his own commentary on his own thoughts. But I think going back to Kate's actually the same point about the CATE is that start with the core problem. That's why for us, is like even Cloaked, we're now adding identity theft protection, data deletion, a lot of these things that are coming up. But I wanted to start with the first part of collection. And I think the number one issue is that we are seeing that let's not fix the collection problem. Let's make it worse. Let's make your email, your phone number, your KYC. With just your phone number, I can get your SSN, your face with Clear, which is what they want to do. You can get everything about you with just your email address. And we're saying, oh, and it's convenient, it's easy. Just use your email address. We can find out everything about you. It'll be a nice and super simple process. But that's a very dangerous road we're heading down. And I think the issue is first is that my identity should not be the same everywhere. It should be distinct based on context, based on reference, and we need to adopt that model. If we go down this path of let's identify everyone very easily, well, yes, maybe for a bank it's simple and makes it simple for the government if they need to figure out SSN, different things. But for commercial companies, the intent, we don't know what that's going to be. We don't know the intent from the government or even the banks, but we don't know the clear at all from these commercial entities. So my take is, number one problem is that we need to figure out how do we stop pushing towards identity should be super simple based on my email or whatever, because I should be different wherever I go. I should be different to the IRS than how I am in front of Domino's. Those two should be different identities at the end of the day.
All right, over to you, Scott.
Yeah, I think that, ask me about technology another time. I'll explain, for 15 hours about all these great strategies with preventative, detective, and corrective controls. I'll bore you to tears. To Arjun's point, one of the most effective things we can do is destroy the value of the data that's being stolen. These threat actors steal data because it's valuable. Let's take the value out of the data. If the data that's being collected on consumers is not something that is a master key, that once I have that piece, I can go open up every one of their 300 commercial accounts. If we take the value out of that data, then the adversaries, first they'll stop exploiting it, right? Eventually they'll stop stealing it because it's not worth the effort. So how do we do that at the beginning of the CATE acronym? How do we help consumers expunge the value from the data, make their identities disposable, make them only uniquely tied to each one of those service providers? So when you steal my target identity, which has been stolen, you can't go use it with the IRS.
Yeah.
And that's a business thing to get started with, but it's something that consumers, once they realize that it all begins with them, they can start to devalue the information that they share with the collection entities.
I think that's actually, I don't want to steal that point, but I think that's the thing we don't talk about. I think we always, right now with the rise of AI, we say AI and privacy. I think, well, one of the things we think about is exactly what data is being collected. And the other thing Scott, actually, you always mention, what are privacy enhancing technologies that can enable that? And I think, what does that mean? And I think that's what we should talk more about in the industry.
100%. I'm going to pose a question that we had here in the comments, and I've undid this also, and found my own workarounds, but of course would love your opinion on this. How do you not give out personal information when you're doing things like interviews, like this live event? social networking, etc. So any situation where it's completely normal to give out your personal information, how can you mitigate any threats from that sharing?
You want to start with that one, or do you want me to?
Yeah. I was gonna say, as someone myself who's extremely public, putting myself out there everywhere, I think the principle I adopt is that I'll put my full name out there, but I am pretty sure you're confident you can't figure out where I live. And I will put that challenge, figure out where I am right now, where I live. I think that's the part you think about, is that there's pieces of information that I know I can put public, but it won't be tied back to me. I always this is what we do with Cloaked. I'm confident I can say a phone number out loud and say, you can text this number. It'll show up on my phone right now. If you text 458-246-4225, I just made the number on the fly. It'll reach me. It'll contact me. But that number is distinct to this live audience. And I think the idea is that how do you protect yourself is that you should realize what information is leading back to you and make sure that it can't tie back to you as your overall identity. Make those distinct, make them separate, make them different overall. That's how I approach this. Now, this one phone number that I said out loud is not going to tie back to my identity as a whole. It's distinct, it's usable, but it's not tied to me. And I think that's where I feel comfortable. And there's also a lot of tactics with addresses, all these things you can do, but it's important to practice privacy, and everywhere you go, they only make this possible. That's why I feel comfortable saying this, because I practice it. Now, I'm not some deep person either. I just follow simple rules. I don't use the same email everywhere. Don't use the same password. Don't use the same phone number. So I'm comfortable speaking online, saying information, because I know you won't be able to find me.
I think, I'm just going to echo what you said, Arjun. It's share as little as possible. In the job interview, you've got to share quite a bit of information because of the relationship you're establishing with the employer. But with every one of these engagements, first, share as little as possible. And secondarily, where you can create unique identifiers for that relationship, do it. Whether it's username or email, right? Certainly your password, credentials, that type of thing. If you can create it such that it's unique to that particular service provider, then it's not going to be exploitable like we've seen in the Roku event. People can't go log into your Roku account with what you've established with, say, Target.
It's a big deal. I think the job one, there's 2 Cloaked customers I think about that it's always kind of comes back to me. I didn't even realize how bad it was. The first one, the job application process. There was one Cloaked customer who called. No one calls her. We have a business line. She called her business line, and I said, "Oh, hello, this is Cloaked." And she asked me if she's having some issues where her people were applying for jobs in her name, and they had her email, their phone number, all this information, and she was struggling. And then she also had the other side of the effect where she was applying to jobs and she didn't know whether they're real or not. And so, there's a huge problem of authenticity, what data. So you have to be protected in these cases. You don't know where your data is going to flow in these different places. And the IRS, when you said earlier, I want to leave that last point around. It doesn't hurt until it hurts. Well, I say there's 2 points. One, it's already hurting today. You're being influenced in a lot of ways you can't see. And then you see incidents like what happened to another Cloaked customer where some hacker filed his taxes, which is wild. I didn't realize this, and I didn't know why they do that. Well, they filed it, one, incorrectly, but they did that because they claimed the reimbursement. So with that, and now it's been 4 years and they still hasn't been solved because he can't prove to the IRS that he didn't pay his taxes. Like they won't believe him. And so it's like these things then, and it's stuck with him. It's hurt him. It's hurt his report, all this stuff. So it'll hurt when it hurts, and it'll hurt really bad. Until then, it's going to influence you every day until it finally hurts miserably. That's kind of the way I approach this. And so you got to practice something today. Even if it's doing one piece of data that's different, you're already starting to pollute the whole thing.
On that note, that very optimistic note, we'll wrap it up here. But for folks who are just joining, you can watch the replay. You can catch a lot of the security tips and stories that our team here has shared. If you're so inclined, would love for you to share this with others. There will be additional events on LinkedIn and beyond where we're sharing the insights from not just our team, but from industry experts as well on privacy and security. And if you haven't signed up for Cloaked yet, what are you doing? You should go to cloaked.com. You should check out the product. There's a 14-day free trial, no credit card required up front. And folks who are part of Cloaked now will get early access to our upcoming products. The last bit I'll ask of anybody who's watching this is follow Arjun on Twitter. He's giving out some free credit cards as we're testing out our Cloaked Cards infrastructure, and you can read more about that on our website. With that, happy Friday, everyone, or happy whatever day it is for you. And we'll wrap it up right here. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Veronica.